Good morning. I'm going to start off with a quick video. Welcome to it. Looking forward to presenting to you guys for the next 30, 40 minutes. And let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Welcome to the largest transformation that I think any of us have ever experienced. And we are really going through something that is going to change every touch point of our lives. And I'm not even sure we all understand exactly how it's going to look, but we are moving at an incredible pace towards it. And that's why today's talk is called Transformation. The motion is really the focus here because we're moving at this unnerving speed towards the most unknown future any of us have ever experienced. And so this both has a emotional toil in us, as well as a sort of nervousness around getting our businesses ready for this incredibly unknown future. Both of these things are very tough on us. And this is not just a business challenge, it's a human challenge. And so today I'm going to go through a bunch of different ideas and my research points to get us to have more courage and more clarity of how to behave in this world that is so different to the world that we come from. I'll take you through a few cycles and seasons and show you where we are in these cycles and in these seasons. I'll share some neuroscience research out of Stanford to try and help us understand what's going on inside our heads, as well as how do we go about setting up our businesses for the future while keeping the old world alive as well. So join me as we go through the process of transformation. Now, transformation has three different parts and has always had three different parts, no matter if it's a small transformation or a large transformation. And the first stage of any transformation is sadness. Sadness that we have to let go of the old world, sadness that we have to let go of the familiar, and sadness to let go of our comfort zones. And this is kind of where we are at the moment because we're having to leave everything that we once knew, everything that we once studied for, worked for, and it's now starting to evolve and change in a very dramatic way. But once we leave the shore of sadness, we arrive at the openness of strangeness, the wilderness, as some people call it, where nothing really makes sense like it used to. Have you bought an NFT, a picture of a rock for $67 million recently? So confusing, so strange, in fact, maybe even absurd to many of us to think about. But welcome to the future, where the multiverse will mix the internet and reality like it's the same sort of world. And this is the type of strangeness that I'm talking about, is that once we leave the sadness, we have to start preparing for the strangeness, because we're not going back to any familiarity. In fact, we're going to incredible unfamiliarity as we move into this transformation. And eventually we will get to an adventure, but we're not quite there yet. And I'll explain to you in the cycles a little bit later why we're not there and when we can expect that to happen. But for the next few years, we are very much in the sad and the strange. And it's important for us to be excited about challenge, for us to seek discomfort, and for us to look for ways to expand who we are, let go of the past, and really start to think about new ways to bring value to the world. Now, the world we live in is really one that is addicted to certainty. And we haven't even realized that we are so addicted to certainty until we have no certainty. And this is what COVID-19 did for us, is took away all our certainty. And all of a sudden we panicked. And the reason for that is that our education system, our organizational systems, our societal systems are based on having absolute outcomes. We love having a specific outcome that we can work towards. But today, we don't have that luxury anymore. And today what we have is this incredible, unnerving, open, expansive, unsure, and unfamiliar future, which gets us to firstly have to admit that we have been addicted to certainty, and also to realize that this is something we'll have to let go of in order for us to prepare for the future. And in fact, our brains love predictability and certainty because it's cheap. In other words, it doesn't use so much energy to try and figure out something that we've already known. It really is expensive for our brains in as far as using energy, excessive energy, to try and figure out what the future looks like when there isn't that sort of certainty. So what we have to realize is that our brains, the very structure of our neuroscience, is built for certainty, and we have to evolve it. And I'm going to show us through some of the cycle examples how in previous times we've had to change where we make decisions from and how we have to evolve with the times. Now, the problem that we're having, or one of the challenges we're having, is UNESCO's Future Literacy Program, who I work with from Paris, where we are building curriculum to try and help as many high school kids as possible to understand the future. They call this mega trend a poverty in reimagination. And that's exactly what they say we are suffering from as human beings. We have a poverty in reimagination in as far as not really thinking about what's next, but rather trying to hold on to the old. And this is the problem that we have to deal with. Instead of moving back to the shore of familiarity, we have to expand into the unknown and do so, in fact, quite excitedly in order for us to create something new as we move into the future. Now, the second sort of phase that I want us to think about is this business flow around the global business flows that we understand that we've been practicing for the last sort of 50 or 60 years. And if we think about it, about 50 years ago, what we had was this idea of globalization, a flow that many of us were so excited about because it brought sort of new opportunities in the world, new partnerships and new collaborations. And this really was given to us through this process of globalization and bringing about efficiencies and those sort of things. And we have all had the benefit of accessing more products more often, more seamlessly, in fact, even more cheaply because of the idea of globalization coming into fruition. But about 20 years ago, the business flow changed and it moved from globalization to digitization. And in the process of digitization, we started to think about digital first businesses. And now we start to realize that every business is digital, in fact, and whatever we do on the other side of that digitization is really up to us. But at the core, all businesses really have to be digital, and makes no sense for any of them not to be. But about 2 years ago, the flow started to change, and the flow started to now move to dispersion. And this is the new business flow that we'll start to see evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And this idea of dispersion is us dispersing away from focal points of congregation. In other words, head offices don't have to be those head offices anymore. We can have a hybrid work or even not even go to the office. Hospitals will be replaced by iWatches and these sort of watches that will give more information to sort of the system or even to our doctor to help with telemedicine, so we never have to go to the hospital. We don't have to go to restaurants, we can get the food delivered to us. We don't have to go to university, we can do the education at home. So we're having these pockets of dispersion where people are starting to disperse out into their own pockets and into their own bubbles. And this both has pros and cons. Pros, you have more flexibility. You have more time with your family or to do the things that you really like besides working. And then the con is obviously we isolate it and we are not engaging with other parts of society either. And we can see this problem manifesting in Japan, where we have a minister of sadness, or that's been installed now because a minister that has been put in there to look out for loneliness and sadness and for people committing suicide. And this is sort of happening in more and more governments out there because of all the isolation that this flow is bringing. We also realize that there's another cycle, and this cycle is all about a book called The Fourth Turning. And this Fourth Turning is an incredible book written in 1996 by two gentlemen called William Strauss and Neil Howe. And in it, what they explain is that we as humanity go through these 80-year, 100-year cycles, and we have been for the last few hundred years. And before I tell you more about the cycles, let me just tell you who these two gentlemen are. They are the ones who came up with the generational archetypes in our understanding of our generations and how different they all are. And so these are the gentlemen that came up with the idea of baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, something that we've become so used to today. But really, they started to show us the demarcation of the changing motivating factors between all of these archetypes and all of these generations. Now, when they had done this research, then they pulled out a bit and they had a different view of the research, and they realized that, look, these 80-year cycles have got these 20-year cycles within them. And these 80-year cycles have been happening for the last few hundreds of years. And so as they started to expand on this, they started to realize that every time somebody's birth in between these 20-year cycles, they have a very different motivating factor of who they are, what they look forward to, what they think of their country, what they believe their future is about. And we know this. We have a grandfather in the household and we have a baby or even a 10-year-old, a Gen Z. We can see the different motivating factors, the different ideas of success. And this is best described with Greta Thunberg fighting against Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, the baby boomer, Greta Thunberg, the Gen Z, fighting and having totally different ideas about what success looks like. But this research is fascinating because what they say is that as humanity goes through these 80-year cycles, we also go through the spring of the cycle, which is the high, also the awakening, which is the summer, also the unraveling, which is the autumn, and finally the crisis, which is the winter, which is what we are today. But let me take you through each one of these to show you how these cycles have actually been going on without us even realizing. Now, the first turning in 1946 to 1964 was the beginning of a new upbeat era of peaceful living. Now, quick caveat, remember that World War II ended in 1946. In other words, that whole 80-year cycle pre this first turning ended with the ending of World War II and the death and destruction and implosion of that whole world out there. And then we began this newness, the high, the renaissance, the spring. And this is the first 20 years post-war, a beginning cycle, if you want to call it that. And in this beginning cycle, we had the space program being introduced to the world. We had United Nations, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. We had jets being introduced to the world, and we had TV being introduced to the world. And this was the beginning of this newness. Now, there's obviously other cycles within countries and smaller geographical areas, but on a global phase, we had all this newness starting to be delivered to the world. But then the spring is always followed by summer. And the second turning was, they call it the awakening, was almost a spiritual awakening of human beings. Now, obviously, Woodstock is the poster child for this, but there were many Woodstocks around the world. And the idea of psychedelics is always seen as a hippie using scenario. But today we can see that actually psychedelics are used for much, much more than just getting wrecked at a party, but actually for PTSD, for emotional hurt, for depression, and a whole bunch of other things. And this awakening really began over this period of between 1964 and 1984. We also had the introduction of computers, an awakening to a new way of technological growth and a new language that we could start speaking. And also the Star Wars movies began over this period of time. And this was again an awakening to who we are inside our galaxy, inside our universe, and all the other possibilities of other life forms in other parts of the universe that we live in. But all summers are followed by autumns. And it was this unraveling, as they call it, which began in 1984 to 2008, where we start to see sort of structures that were set up start to decay and start to unravel. Berlin Wall was one of these that happened over this period of time, where we started to see the unraveling of the idea of communism and capitalism beating communism. We also had Tiananmen Square happen over this period of time, where the questioning of communism, China was questioned, where we really opened up China to this capitalism world that they've been in and journey they've been in for the last 40 or 50 years, 30, 40 years. And really now we're starting to see China now revert back to some form of nationalist socialism. But for the moment, this really was the catalyst, the Tiananmen Square, the unraveling that started to happen over this time. We also had the unraveling of our impact on the earth based on business. And the Exxon Valdez tragedy was very much this, is our prioritization of profit over everything else. We started to see the destruction and the impact we're having on the earth. And this really began the green movement. So the unraveling of the structures of business also happened over this period of time. And 9/11. 9/11 also happened over this period of time, where we started to see the unraveling of what we thought war was, terrorism was, conspiracy theory, started to question who the goodies and who the baddies were. And this really started unraveling our idea of the good versus evil. And we started to question who the good and who the evil actually were. And then the fourth turning began in 2008. And let me just remind you that this book was written in 1996. And they weren't predicting anything. They were just telling us what happened in all the other cycles. And again, their predictions came true, because this is what happens every 80 years. And so the financial crisis was the beginning of this crisis that we're in at the moment. They also predicted massive levels of nationalism and political divide. And again, we started to see Brexit, the Italian sort of fascist parties, the Greek fascist parties, obviously the American Republican Democratic fights. And we started to see this nationalism, political divide really start to come into play from about 2014, 2015, 2016, and Trump really allowing that to happen around the world in a much bigger way with his voice of that sort of nationalism. They also predicted a massive war over this period of time, and we had COVID-19, which was an unexpected war, but a war in many ways. Close to 5 million people lost, a common enemy that was invisible in many ways, and now we're starting to get over it, but still a war nevertheless. They also predicted massive levels of job unemployment, and this gets us to realize that actually what's going on here is that all of these things are always predictable because we need old cycles to die and new cycles to be birthed. And this is the key here, is that this is just very much part and parcel of the process. And where we are today and alive today, where we have 1 foot in the fourth turning and 1 foot in the first turning, we have to prepare and understand the difference between the old world and be able to let go of it in order to prepare for this new world. Now, all of us are impacted very differently by this type of crisis. And I call this process the neuroscience of survival consciousness trigger points. And what I mean by this is that our brains are actually activated in very different ways when we are given these crises. And so what we have and what we must become aware of is that we have thousands and thousands of relationships throughout the day, let alone in our lifetimes. And by that, I mean, we all have a very private relationship with our bodies. When we look at our bodies in front of the mirror, do we love it? Do we hate it? We have very private relationships with money, with technology, with men, with women, with people of color, with fat people, thin people, tall people, with name it, the weather. We all have a very specific relationship with each one of these, and each one of these things trigger us in a very different way. Now we're sitting with a massive crisis on our hands, and this has got a mass triggering that's happening to all of humanity around the world. Now, there's 2 clear ways that we can perceive this reality and be triggered by it or not triggered by it. And this work is not my work, but I was finding it through the research that I did for my last book. And what they say is that the 2 types of way for us to approach this reality is 1, through a naive mindset, and 2, through a mature mindset. And the problem here is that we often don't even know we are suffering from the naive mindset. And so I myself, when I was doing this research, I started to realize how many things I was actually suffering from when it came to the naive mindset. So let's get busy and understand what the naive mindset actually is. Now, there's 3 characteristics in each one of them, the naive and the mature. The naive mindset has the first characteristic of the victim. Poor me, I can't believe this is happening to me, or I'm entitled to better. This is not fair that's happening because I am a woman, I am a man, I am black, I am white, and you can name whatever you want. You can always be victimized by whatever it is. And if you think about Trump, a billionaire president of the United States, still the biggest victim in the world. It really doesn't matter what your background's about. It's the way you perceive the reality around you that really either holds you to the old identity and the old world, or you can release it and now start to move towards something new. The second characteristic is one of the savior, or the person that's sympathetic to the world, somebody who sits on the couch and is just sad for the world, but does absolutely nothing for it. I'm sure we know people like this that think because they're feeling sad and because they're feeling anxious for the world, that's what they need to be doing. And if they don't feel that, they don't feel great. But actually what they're doing is just giving themselves permission to be sad, because your sadness is not helping anybody else out there on the street in any way. And the best description of this is Oprah. Oprah doesn't feel sad or sympathetic towards women. She feels empathetic towards women, and she goes and builds schools for women to try and uplift women. Very different energy. Both people want to help. One sits on the couch and feels sad, and one gets out there and actually does something. And then the third characteristic is the angry person. I'm so angry, and I am so addicted to taking offense to everything. And so I'm continuously angry, and I look for many things to be angry about because then that justifies my anger. But the truth is, you're just addicted to being in drama. And this naive mindset is also called the drama triangle. And often we are addicted to being in drama. And if there isn't drama in our lives, we look for drama. And we want to bring that drama to the surface. And that gives us this addiction, this hit of addiction that we crave. And guess what? Over this mass trauma that we're going through humanity, this mass transformation, we have many people that are feeling sorry for themselves, angry with the world, and sorry for other people. So if you are stuck in any one of these characteristics, realize that they're not helping you evolve. It is just a patterning that you've got inside your brain. You can change it through awareness and practice. This is obvious that you can change any aspect of your life, especially when you've been triggered by this level of massive transformation that we're in. Now, obviously, if you're stuck in any of these, you aren't able to evolve in any way. And that's why I was saying is moving from the fourth turning to the first turning, you don't really have a choice. None of us have a choice. We have to evolve. And if we're stuck in feeling angry, sorry for ourselves, or sorry for other people, we're not evolving in any way. And what we need to do is we need to actually move into the mature mindset, or the creator triangle, as it's known otherwise. And what you have is, instead of victim, you have creator. You have this opportunity to now not see problems, but look for solutions. You also don't need to feel sympathetic for people. You can feel empathetic for people. You don't have to look down on them, but you can help lift them up. And finally, you don't have to be angry with the world. You can now challenge the world to be better. Better yourself, better the colleagues around you, your family, your community, your society. And if we can all get into the mature mindset, into the creator, coaching, and challenger ideology, we start to change our neuroscience. We start to look forward to challenge, and we start to look forward to newness, rather than trying to hold on to old identities and trying to hold on to old ideas of success. Now, because the future is moving at such a pace, in fact, exponentially, which is something very difficult for the human brain to understand, because it's just exponentially just means that things are doubling on themselves all the time, which we can't even hold on to or keep on to. We have to realize that the very structure of how we think about business must be changed. And so as we start to understand the move from the fourth turning to the first turning, from globalization, digitization to dispersion, we have to now realize that once we get over ourselves with this naive mindset of the drama triangle, which takes time, awareness, and practice, and you understand that that addiction takes a little bit of time to move away from being in the drama triangle to the creator triangle, we now have to start applying this to business, because these are all internal ideas. And now what does it actually look like for our businesses? No matter what business you're in, you have to realize that the structure of how the businesses are set up around the world is moving from a complicated structure to a complex one. And there's vastly big differences between complicated and complex. And let me take you through them. The world we come from is a complicated one. In other words, there are patterns that repeat themselves. And because of these patterns that repeat themselves, you can actually understand what your future looks like by using mathematics, Excel spreadsheets, and accounting, because by utilizing these linear ideologies about the future, you can look for patterns that repeat themselves, take the past, extrapolate into the future with some minor adjustments. In a complicated world, this makes absolute sense, and it has been successful for hundreds of years. Everything is eventually automated in a complicated world, because automation requires pattern recognition. And because of this pattern recognition, we can create big time economies of scale and efficiencies. Now, in the world we come from, economies of scale is paramount importance. Efficiency is key. Why? You've been doing what you've been doing for the last few years. You're going to carry on doing what you've been doing for the last few years. So you must bring efficiencies and economies of scale. This keeps the business lean and profitable for the long term in a complicated world. But now, as we move into a complex world, the rules are changing. The very fundamentals of business are starting to change. And this is very difficult for all of us to start to grasp. So what is a complex world? A complex world is a world where you have some patterns, but they don't repeat themselves. You cannot use Excel spreadsheets, accounting, and mathematics to solve and understand the future, because the future doesn't look like the past. And there is no automation or technology that's complex enough to understand a world that has patterns that don't repeat themselves. And finally, the most important thing here is that we have to realize that we're moving away from economies of scale to economies of learning. And we're moving away from efficiency to robustness. Now, what does this mean? Economies of learning means how quickly I can unlearn to relearn makes me a superstar in the future. Because when nothing is certain and I have to be ready and available to be adaptable and agile, as was spoken about by Helen at the beginning of this conference, is this agility is brought about not by economies of scale, but by economies of learning. And this is vastly different. Our brains have been addicted to certainty, not adaptability. Our brains find it difficult to be adaptable. We want certainty. And so you understand how this keynote's starting to touch on all the points for us to realize that the very way that we used to make decisions has to be challenged. And so let me land this with you with an example. You remember when we used to travel a lot? We used to get to the airport, we put our suitcase on the conveyor belt. That conveyor belt used to get our suitcase to us on the plane in the most complicated, highly efficient, highly automated, pattern repeating process. 99% of the time our suitcase would get to us. Now, if you carry on watching this video, and I'm sure you've seen many of them, the journey our suitcases go behind the scenes is an absolute flippin' miracle that those suitcases get to us. But we've understood automation, and automation hardly gets it wrong, where we have patterns that repeat themselves, and you'll see hardly any people involved in this process because it's highly automated, and those suitcases get to us in a complicated manner, but absolutely work because of economies of scale and efficiencies. But the minute we take off, we are now no more in a complicated world. Now we are in a complex world. And what does that mean? It means that we have no idea what's coming when we're up in the air. And so what do? We build planes for complexity, not complications. And so what does complexity means is that I have 4 engines when 1 is enough. I have 3 pilots when 1 is enough. I have 5 operating systems when 1 is enough. Why? Because I have no idea what's coming. So I over prepare. I'm robust in my expression, in my service, and in my way of bringing about my skills to the world, because I don't know what's coming. Now, if a plane was built with complicated processes in mind, you would have 1 engine, 1 operating system, and no pilots, and they'll be falling out the sky left, right, and center. So the world of complexity is the world we're moving into. The world of complicated, the world of conveyor belts is what we are starting to move away from. Now, if you studied economics back in the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, like I did, the biggest word that was thrown around there, well, not the biggest word, but one of the biggest words was JIT, just in time, brought about by Toyota in Japan, which was all about efficiencies and economies of scale. Now, just in time is perfect for a complicated world, but we have to move that terminology to just in case for a complex world. And I have a solution for this, because I do think that economies of scale are still very important. But as we start moving into this new world, we have to start realizing that there has to be a separation of the ideologies. You can't actually live with these 2 ideologies under one roof. And so if we understand this and we start to realize that the world we live in at the moment is run by experts in a complicated world, not experts in a complex world. And this is best described by Herman Kahn, one of the foremost futurists that I've ever read about, because he has passed away, unfortunately. What he says is the more expert, or at least the more educated a person is, the less likely that person is to see a solution when it is not within the framework in which he or she was taught to think. And what we have today is globally, the world is run by mostly baby boomers and Gen Xers. And the world of complications, the world of pattern repeating, economies of scale is all we've been taught, is all we understand. This is the way we see the world. But as we move in a world of complexity, these rules don't matter. They're not even relevant in this new world that we're moving into. That's why we have these 22-year-old kids building multi-billion-dollar businesses that are totally decentralized, but have totally different structures to them. And so this is the thing that we have to start realizing, is that we must be clear that we mustn't get stuck in innovation loops. In fact, we must become clear that innovation and disruption are vastly different ideologies. And we have to hire new types of people to get us to think about these things in brand new ways, because often we don't have the skill sets because we just haven't been educated as yet, and we have a lot of catching up to do. But let's just think about what innovation is and why some people think innovation is actually enough. So innovation is doing what you've always done, just more modified and more efficiently. This is still very, very important, but really not what's going to get you to get in ready for the first turning. It's good for the 4th turning, but like I said, the 4th turning is now coming to an end. And a brand that really got stuck in the innovation loop worse than anybody else in history that I've seen, not in history, in recent history, is Gillette. Gillette went from 1 blade to 2 blade to 3 blade to 4 blade to 5 blade to 6 blade. Did anybody ask for these bloody blades? I didn't. But the poor sods with their white jacket do what we did last year, just a bit better. And because of this problem, as well as a growing love of beards, Gillette had to shave off $8 billion off their balance sheets in 2019. Why? They outpriced themselves from the market. Now we have to buy Gillette's shavers that are locked away inside grocery stores and pharmacies. Why? Because they're so expensive and people are starting to steal them. And this is really an innovation loop, a disaster on many fronts, because at the very same time that Gillette lost an $8 billion off their balance sheet, a business called the $1 Shave Club got sold for $1 billion to Unilever, Procter & Gamble's competition. And what were they doing? They created a subscription model. And in this subscription model, you paid $1 a month, and every month they would send you a one-bladed shaver, not 6, not 5, not 4, just one. And in that one blade, you could have a fantastic shave, and every month it would be replenished with a $1 subscription. Change the business model, change what we were actually looking for, sold for $1 billion while they lost $8 billion. We understand that the innovation loop is a dangerous place to be, because I don't think the guys at Gillette thought they were doing anything wrong. They just keep putting the same input and innovating like they did last year, just adding a little bit like they did from the year before. Remember that the light bulb wasn't invented because they made the candlestick more efficient. And so efficiencies and economies of scale have their place, but not to be disruptive, but rather just to be innovative. Now, a word that I see being thrown around a lot is the word of resilience. And what we have to do is be resilient with this amount of change that's coming to us. But I think resilience is a trap. In fact, I don't think resilience is a very good thing if we practice only the first two aspects of resilience. Now, just like transformation, resilience has 3 sections. The first section is respond. The second section is recover. And the third section is reimagine. So what do? Is when we become resilient, we respond, and then we recover, and then we stop. We're like, okay, we responded to the tragedy, we responded to the crisis, now we're going to recover, and then we're going to stop. This is what people that are experts of the complicated world do. These are the innovators of the world, the disruptors of the world, the people that need to be ready for complexity are the ones that actually reimagine with resilience. Because remember, reimagining is tough. It's not an easy process because that part of our brain has been sleeping. We haven't really worked with it. So all we're comfortable to do is respond and recover. We're actually not comfortable to reimagine. So let me give you an example of what disruption looks like and how different disruption is to innovation, because disruption is making your current business model obsolete to create a new business model. That's a tough part, because how do you make your current business model obsolete to create a new one? Now, here's a small example, but a scary one. If you're an airline, back in May 2020, airlines, the ones on your right-hand side of your screen, altogether were worth $44 billion. That's lots of planes, lots of staff, there's lots of operational headaches. Zoom at that time, remember May 2020 was just as the pandemic was starting, was worth $48 billion, already worth more than all the airlines on the right-hand side. Zoom forward to August 2021, and all of a sudden Zoom is worth 3 times as much. And I am scared to even add up what these airlines are worth now. This is disruption. We were able to transport our sensors to other parts of the world, not using any airlines at all. And Japan Airlines understood this. They understood that there would be a massive need for new ways for us to travel in the future, but they realized that they didn't have the skills to actually come up with the ideas of what next travel could be. Because why? People that run Japan Airlines are excellent at planes, pilots, engineering, financing the planes, service, those sort of things, right? They don't understand what the future of travel will be. They can innovate travel, but they can't disrupt travel. So what do they do? They put a $70 million fund together to collaborate with some startups, and they came up with the most mind-bending and blasting option that I've ever heard. It's called the Limitless Travel Avatar. And this is actually the beginning of the multiverse, which I'll get to just now. But Limitless Travel Avatar is about traveling by never leaving your couch or your bed. So what is it? It means that they want to have a development of an avatar system around the world. They want these avatars or robots in pretty much everywhere around the world. And what you can do is put on goggles and a full body suit with gloves, where you can now take over that avatar or that robot's sensors and body wherever they are. Now, the examples that they've already started to use, which I thought were fascinating, is imagine your grandmother is in Pofada and she's not doing well, she's in bed, and you are in London, and together you want to spend some time in New York. And so your grandmother in Pofadder gets shipped the goggles and the suit to her. She puts them on. You in London also put on your goggles and your suit. And now together you take over 2 robots or 2 avatars in New York, and you can spend an hour together walking around New York, taking in the sights, having a conversation with each other, seeing your grandmother seeing you, because that's what the goggles will give you, and actually feeling every little thing these robots can feel. So for the moment, these robots can hear everything, see everything, feel everything. They can't taste or touch yet, but that's around the corner. But you start to realize that innovation is making flights better, more efficient, more profitable. Disruption is creating an avatar system for what next and what travel may be and what may look like. If we get back to the neuroscience again, we start to realize that this makes our brains tired and sore to think about things like this. And this is why a book called Growth Mindset is very important for all of us to read. This is Carol Dweck. She's a Stanford research professor on psychology and neuroscience. And this is a book that she wrote many years ago. Satya Nadella, in fact, the CEO of Microsoft, got everybody to read this book when he took over as CEO, and you can see what's happened to that company since. But what Growth Mindset says, really at the base of it, is we have to start enjoying learning instead of not enjoying learning. And so what they say is that our dopamine, our internal reward system, can either be brought about intrinsically, internally, or from externally, where we need input or from outside to be able to have a dopamine rush. And what they say is that our society has created something called a dopamine reward prediction error. And this is the problem that we're having in a society that's addicted to certainty. And the best example I can give you is, imagine your kid is writing a test next week, Wednesday. And what you do is you say, hey, little Sarah, I'm so happy that you've been studying for so long. That's well done, my girl. And when you get your A on your report card, we'll go out and celebrate. That is a dopamine reward prediction error, because we don't celebrate the challenge. We don't celebrate the studying. We don't celebrate any of that. And in fact, if she doesn't get an A, the whole process has been one without dopamine and with no energy, no joy, and no happiness. And so what we have to start realizing is that this absolute outcomes, the certainty and the addiction to certainty, is holding us back from actually enjoying challenge. Now, they did many different experiments. I'll share 2 with you. They had these 10-year-old kids doing art, loved doing art, and their dopamine was rushing because they intrinsically were giving themselves dopamine because they loved doing art. Then the teacher started giving them gold stars for the art. And they started to move the dopamine from internal access to external access. And the teachers would keep giving them the gold stars, and the kids kept loving doing art, and everything was great. And then they started taking the gold stars away, and all of a sudden the kids stopped loving doing art. Why? They'd switched from an internal locus of dopamine to an external locus of dopamine. And so we realized that this need for outside acceptance, outside outcomes, and absolute certainty is actually holding us back from having a growth mindset. Now, they also did some research around Navy SEALs, and the guys who made it through the Navy SEALs were the ones that loved the process and the effort. They loved that challenge. If you ever watch anything from David Goggins, who's become famous Navy SEALs, he loves that challenge, and he's very vocal about it. And he says that if you don't love the challenge, you're never going to get through that training. But guess where we are today? We are moving from the 4th turning to the 1st turning. This is a tough time. And this is what we have to start to realize, is that we have to change the neuroscience around what we feel is effort and challenge so we can seek the discomfort. Nassim Taleb also wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, which is all about this concept that if you're fragile and you fall, you break. But if you're anti-fragile and you fall, you get stronger. So what do? You look for places to fall so you can get stronger. In this time of uncertainty, the most important thing we can do is realize that in order to conquer uncertainty, we have to understand the cycles we're in. We have to unpack the neuroscience inside our heads and then split our businesses into 2. And this is the radical suggestion, because I don't think it's a comfortable suggestion for anybody to think about it like this, but what we all need is a today and tomorrow team. And a today team is a business that's focused on the 1 to 2 year horizons, all about economies of scale, profitability, old business models. And these people are really the experts of yesterday, and they are called the innovators. And this is very important because this part of the business pays for the tomorrow team and needs to be kept alive and cooking, because eventually this will start becoming less relevant, but right now very important. But what most businesses don't have is a tomorrow team, and a tomorrow team is focused on the 2 to 5 year horizons. They're all about economies of learning, experimentation, misspelled experimentation, my apologies, new business models, experts of tomorrow, and these are actually called the disruptors. And what we need to understand is that Japan Airlines created a tomorrow team. In fact, I can give you umpteen examples of companies that created tomorrow teams to take care of what's coming while they kept the old world alive. And by us having a today and tomorrow team, we can both respond and recover to the world as well as reimagine the future ahead of us. Now, every successful person that I've ever come into contact with always has two beliefs. The future will be better than the past, and I have the power to make it so. If I can understand what cycle I'm in, understand what part of the cycle I'm in, understand the neuroscience that's required for me to change within myself, the realization that I need to let go of the old ways of making a success and impact to the world and start to adopt new ways, become aware of my trigger points and not get stuck into the drama triangle, actually get into the creative triangle, we start to realize that in times of massive transition, it is the ones that spend the most time reimagining the new adventure ahead that will thrive. The ones that hold on to the old world as tightly as possible because their identities are linked to it will suffer a lot. But this ultimately becomes your incredible privilege of choice, because it really is ultimately up to you how you want to take on challenge or fade away from it. Thank you very much for your attention. If I have answered all your questions in this talk, I'm very happy. If not, please reach out on social media. I'll be happy to share and answer any of your questions there. Thank you for your attention and good luck for the rest of your conference.